The exclusion and the phone call. The phone was still ringing when I knew something was wrong. You can feel betrayal before it speaks. It hangs in the air like static before a storm. When I finally picked up, my hand was trembling, though I didn't yet know why. Max, I asked, forcing cheer into my voice. Any news about the date? A pause. Then another voice, smooth, confident, young Lena's. Oh, we already got married yesterday, she said lightly, like announcing the weather. We only invited special people. Special people. The phrase hit me so hard I actually laughed, a small disbelieving sound that scraped my throat. I waited for her to correct herself, to add, of course, you were one of them, but silence stayed loyal to her. I stood in my kitchen, the same kitchen that had smelled of coffee and responsibility for 40 years. The wedding gift lay half-wrapped on the counter, an envelope with a check, a card that read to my beloved son and his beautiful bride. My hands had written those words with joy. Now they shook. Max's voice came next, careful, practiced. Mom, it was a very small thing, just the two of us, and witnesses. Witnesses, not family, not me. Behind him, I heard laughter. Lena's parents, maybe, or her sister with the champagne laugh I'd heard over video calls. That sound burned more than any insult. I wanted to say 1,000 things, that I'd bought her dress with my savings, that I'd been planning to surprise them with flowers, that I had cleaned the whole house in case they stopped by afterward. But what do you say when you realize you're a guest in a story you financed? I managed only, I hope it was beautiful. Then I hung up because crying on the phone felt too much like begging. That night the house was too quiet. I sat at the table where a family once lingered after dinner, tracing the wood grain as if it held explanations. For 3 years I had paid their rent $500 every month without fail. I had bought the sofa they now lounged on, the refrigerator they filled, the curtains she had picked in cream because light colors make everything look expensive. Every time I wired money, I told myself it was temporary, an act of love, a bridge until they stood on their own. But bridges that never end become roads you live on forever. I fetched my old checkbook and began to calculate. 500 times 36, 18,000. Groceries, gifts, small emergencies, 7,000 more. The car loan, 2,500. The air conditioner, the new phone Max wanted for work, the medical bill I paid directly to the clinic. The numbers gathered like witnesses around me. When I finished, the sum glared from the page. $33,400. Money that could have repaired the roof, funded a small trip, bought quiet security for my old age. Instead, it bought silence from a son and indifference from his wife. I whispered the total aloud once, just to taste what betrayal costs. $33,400. It didn't sound like love. It sounded like tuition for a lesson I hadn't meant to learn. At midnight, I opened my closet. The pink dress hung there, perfect, innocent. I touched the fabric and felt foolishly tender toward it. I was ready for you, I murmured, but they never were for me. A week passed. I avoided social media, but curiosity is cruel. It finds you even when you hide. Someone tagged me in a post. There they were, Lena and Max cutting cake under strings of lights, her parents beaming, her sister filming. My heart did a small, exhausted turn inside my chest. I shut the laptop and promised myself I would not cry again. The next morning, the phone rang, the same number. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th, I answered. Lena's voice trembled. Renata, the rent is overdue. The landlord says if we don't pay this week, he'll evict us. You forgot the transfer. You forgot, as if duty were a habit I'd accidentally skipped. I looked around my kitchen, still spotless from the imagined after-wedding celebration that never happened. I thought of every time I'd stood in bank lines, transferring money before paying my own bills. I remembered eating plain rice so they could have steak. A calm I didn't recognize settled over me. It wasn't spite. It was clarity, the kind that arrives when pain finishes teaching. Lena, I said softly, didn't I warn you? I only help special people. For a second, nothing. Then a thin breath through the line. I don't understand. I think you do, I said. She tried again, sugarcoating desperation. We're special to you, Renata. You've always said that you're like a second mother. Second mothers, I replied. Stop paying when the first lesson is learned. I ended the call before guilt could speak. For the first time in years, my hands weren't shaking. Cruel. It was the kind of silence that lets you hear your own heartbeat and realize it's steady. I brewed coffee and sat by the window. The world outside looked the same: cars, children, the neighbor's dog barking, but something inside me had changed shape. I looked at the legal pad where the numbers still glared. $33,400. Love shouldn't be an invoice. When the phone rang again that afternoon, I let it. It rang a long time, then stopped. 10 minutes later, it rang again. Then, a message. Mom, please answer. We need to talk. I deleted it without opening. I went for a walk, the first one not directed by someone else's need. The park was quiet, the trees kind. I passed the bench where I once waited for Max after school, holding a sandwich and the certainty that motherhood was simple arithmetic. Give enough, and they will love you. Now, I knew arithmetic can lie. By evening, I felt something close to peace. But peace is fragile when predators sense movement, because the next time the phone rang, it wasn't begging. It was strategy. The voice on the other end said calmly, Mrs. Richter, I'm calling on behalf of your son and daughter. They'd like to arrange a meeting with legal counsel present. And just like that, I understood. When kindness stops paying interest, greed hires a lawyer. They thought they could take my silence and turn it into permission. But they were about to learn that even quiet mothers keep records, and mine could burn them alive. The boundary call and the lawyer in the living room. The next morning the phone would not stop ringing. Every few minutes the silence of my kitchen was torn apart by that same tone. Urgent, pleading, relentless. It was amazing how sound could feel like hands tugging at you, insisting that you still belonged to someone. I didn't answer. I poured coffee instead, steadying the cup with both hands because my fingers still remembered the habit of shaking. The steam curled upward like a quiet applause for my newfound discipline. By the 10th call, I understood something vital. Desperation multiplies when the supply runs dry. They were not calling for love. They were calling for access. When I finally turned on the phone again, there were 12 missed calls and 5 messages. Each one climbed in tone. From Mom, we need to talk to. This is serious. You can't ignore us. The last one, from Lena, read, Renata, please. We have a situation with the landlord. Don't make this harder than it already is. The phrase sounded rehearsed, the kind of sentence people use when guilt no longer works. I wrote back only 2 words. No transfers. For a few blessed hours, silence returned. Then, at dusk, a knock at my door. Not timid, not polite. 3 sharp raps that announced authority. When I opened it, Max was there. He didn't hug me. He didn't even smile. Behind him stood Lena, arms folded tight across her chest, and a man I had never seen before. Mid-50s, gray suit, expensive briefcase, confidence that smelled like paperwork. Mom, Max began, we just want to talk. I stepped aside, not out of kindness, but curiosity. If they were bringing witnesses now, I wanted to hear the script. They sat down in my living room, the same one I'd furnished for them years ago. Lena perched on the edge of the sofa like a cat about to strike. The stranger opened his case and took out a folder. Mrs. Richter, he said smoothly, I'm Dr. Fisher. I represent your family's interests. They're concerned about your recent financial decisions. My family's interests. Interesting phrase, I thought, because my interests had never been on that list. Max cleared his throat, trying for patience. Mom, we're worried. You've been acting different, not answering calls, canceling the transfers, cutting us off without explanation. Different, they always call it different when a woman stops being convenient. I looked at him and saw not my son but a man who had learned to keep score. I explained everything, I said quietly. You're adults now. Adults pay their own rent. Lena leaned forward, voice trembling with the kind of emotion that can cry on command. Renata, please, we know you're under stress. Maybe loneliness is affecting you more than you realize. It's normal at your age to feel confused. That word, confused, it landed like a slap. So this was the game. If guilt failed, diagnosis would do. Dr. Fisher nodded sympathetically, sliding the folder closer to me. These documents will help. It's a simple power of attorney. Max and Lena would temporarily manage your finances, just until you feel more stable. The audacity made me almost smile. They had come into my house, sat on my furniture, and offered to steal my life with paperwork. I stood. My voice was calm, colder than I expected. I am stable. What I am not is stupid. Lena blinked, unsure how to react. Max started to speak, but I raised a hand, a gesture I had used when he was 5, and wouldn't stop arguing. Some habits never lose their authority. You will all leave my house now, I said. The lawyer tried to interject, something about obligations and legal rights, but I was already gathering the papers from my table. Without reading them, I dropped the folder straight into the trash bin beside the door. The sound it made, soft, final, was better than any signature. Lena's composure cracked first. "You can't do this to us," she hissed. Tears of fury gathering but not falling. "We've built our life around you helping us. You owe us." I felt something inside me harden into truth. "I owe you nothing," I said. "Every gift I gave was voluntary. Every dollar was love. And you spent it like water." Dr. Fisher packed his briefcase quickly. Realizing the meeting was over, "Mrs. Richter," he warned, "this could escalate legally." "Then let it," I replied. "You can send the bill to my special people." The irony tasted sweet. As they left, Max paused in the doorway. "Mom, this will end badly for you," he said. "You'll be alone when you need someone most." I looked straight into his eyes. "I've been alone for years," I said softly. "I just didn't notice because the room was full." He didn't answer. They walked out, leaving the door wide open behind them. I closed it myself and locked it twice. For the first time in decades, the sound of the bolt sliding home felt like music. That night I thought the battle was over. But predators rarely retreat after losing a meal. They regroup. And by morning, my phone was already buzzing with the next attack. A stranger's number, carrying their newest weapon, the accusation of insanity. The boundary call and the lawyer in the living room. I didn't sleep much that night. It wasn't fear that kept me awake. It was the echo of my own voice, steady in the quiet, saying no without shaking. I lay there in the dark, listening to the honest creaks of an old house, and realizing how many years I'd confused peace with silence. At dawn, I made coffee and wrote a list, the kind you write when you have finally decided to be your own witness. Call the bank, end every automatic transfer. Ask about security flags and account protections. Change the locks. Tell the truth to someone who loves me. The first call was to the bank. Mr. Klein had known me for years. A patient man with a careful voice who remembered the names of widows and the dates of pensions. When I told him I needed to cancel every recurring transfer, he didn't interrupt, though I could feel the surprise through the line like a shift in the weather. "Are you sure, Mrs. Rick?" he asked gently. "I am, and I want to place a note on my accounts. No third-party access. No discussion of balances with anyone but me. If someone calls, claiming to advocate for my welfare, they do not." There was a pause. "Respectful. Understood. Come by today, and we'll add a pin phrase only you know. We'll also set alerts for any unusual activity." "I'll be there before noon," I said. When I reached the branch, he met me at the door the way decent people meet grief, with kindness that doesn't pry. We sat in his small office. He printed a stack of pages, the paper warm from the machine. He slid me a pen and watched me read, not because he doubted my eyesight, but because he wanted me to see myself signing. There is a dignity in being witnessed by someone who has nothing to gain. As we finished, he cleared his throat. "Forgive me if this is out of line, but I've watched you support your family for a long time. If you feel pressured, know that we can flag your accounts. We also have a liaison who can help if anyone attempts coercion." Coercion, a large word, unafraid to name what smaller words try to soften. "I am not pressured," I said, and felt the truth of it right down to the bones of my hands holding the pen. "I am finished." He nodded. We shook hands. He walked me to the door, and in that brief, ordinary moment, a banker and an old woman, and a glass door that opened when pushed, I felt something like the world rights itself by a fraction. Outside, the day was bright in that way winter days sometimes are, clear, uncompromising. I stood on the sidewalk a while, letting the light tell me it was morning for everyone, not just me. Then I walked to the hardware store. Mr. Sumyer knew me from years of purchases that had mostly benefited other people. Paint for Max's living room, screws for Lena's wobbly shelf, extension cords for their holiday decorations. He looked up from the register and smiled. "Back again, Mrs. Richter. What are we fixing today?" "My doors," I said. "All of them. Best locks you have. And if your son is available, I'd like a security camera kit installed around the house." He didn't joke or ask for details. He simply wrote up the order and called into the back. His boy, Ethan, came out wiping his hands on a rag, young and he listened as I explained where I wanted the cameras mounted, how I preferred to see the feed, and that I needed door sensors not because I am forgetful but because other people are bold. "We can install tomorrow morning," he said. "I'll walk you through the app. It's simple." "I'm learning," I answered. "I'm learning many new things." Back home, I stood on the porch with the new locks in a brown paper sack and felt a small thrill I couldn't name at first. It took me a moment to recognize it. Ownership, not the legal kind, the felt kind. The click in the chest that says this is mine and I am allowed to protect it. I spent the afternoon cleaning, but differently. Not the frantic cleaning of a woman preparing to prove she deserves company. This was slow, private, almost tender, polishing the wood of the dining table, washing the curtains and letting them dry in the bright air, dusting the corners where cobwebs make elegant, useless lace. I moved through the rooms like someone returning to a house she once loved and left by accident. The phone lit up on the counter again and again. Unknown numbers, one local, one blocked, one with a name I recognized from the law office embossed on Dr. Fisher's card. I turned the ringer off and let it vibrate across the laminate until the thing gave up and lay still. There is a power in not answering. It teaches your nervous system a new alphabet. Around 4, I called my sister Renata. Diana said, surprised, "You're calling early. Is everything okay? I'm going to tell you something and I don't want you to stop me until I'm finished." I spoke calmly, the way you describe directions to a driver who keeps taking wrong turns. I told her about the wedding, the sentence about special people, the ledger on the legal pad, the knock at my door, the gray suit, the folder sliding into my trash. I expected pity. I expected outrage. What I got was relief. "Oh, my dear," she breathed. "I have been waiting for this day." I didn't know how to say it without sounding unkind. "They have been using you for years." "I know. I mean, truly using you," she said, as if she needed to hear the word twice to believe it. "Not family help, not kindness. Use." "I know," I repeated, and the words tasted like cool water. Then she did the thing sisters are for. She made me laugh. "Do you remember when you taught me to bake bread, and I kept adding flour because the dough looked sticky? That's what you've been doing, adding flour to something that needed to be worked, not fed." We laughed, and it felt like air entering a room that had been sealed too long. When we said goodbye, she told me she was proud of me. I didn't argue. I accepted the sentence fully formed and let it hang on the kitchen wall with the copper pans. That evening, as the house drew its curtains of shadow, I took the dress from the closet one last time. I slid it into its garment bag, pressed the zipper closed, and carried it to the spare room. Then I wrote a note for myself in my neatest script and taped it to the bag. "You owed no one this color." I was in the hallway, pinning up the last errant strand of my hair, when headlights swept across the front windows and stopped. Not the slow pass of a neighbor coming home. A stop, abrupt, deliberate. I did not go to the door. I went to the side window and looked through the edge of the curtain. Max's car, behind it Lena's, and a third one I didn't recognize. They didn't get out. They sat there a long minute, headlights on, the beam flattening the front steps, bleaching the paint. Then the lights turned off, and I watched shapes move inside the cars, heads turning, phones lit like little moons. Another minute, then doors opened, and they all stood in the cold, talking in tight, angry gestures, pointing at my porch, at the windows. At the lock they used to slide with their own keys. They had keys, not anymore. I had changed the front lock that afternoon, and stacked the old hardware in a small box on the bottom shelf of the hall closet. I thought of that box now and felt a satisfaction so clean, it almost felt like a blessing. I didn't open the door. I called Mr. Weber. He answered on the second ring, his voice steady, aware. I recited facts the way a good witness does. Time, number of people, license plate of the third car. I told him about the previous night in the folder and the sentences that hinted at guardianship. He listened the way a man listens who has heard this story before from other women and never once allowed it to become boring. "I'm on my way," he said. "Stay inside. I'll also notify the police." After our conversation yesterday, I prepared a request for a temporary restraining order. "Tonight, we'll put it to use." "Thank you," I said, the two words suddenly sacred. From the window I watched the scene shift, the irritated pacing, the huddled conversations. The way Lena stabbed at her phone with her finger like anger could be transmitted through screens. Max didn't look at the house the way a son looks at a childhood home. He looked at it the way men look at faults. I stood very still and let the observation settle where it belonged. Sirens announced themselves respectfully. Not a spectacle, just the sound of help arriving. Mr. Weber's car pulled up behind the cruisers, and two officers got out first, young and courteous, hands low, voices lower. One of them came to my door and asked if I was safe. I nodded. He said, "Please wait inside while we speak to your visitors." Visitors. The word was generous, but I let it stand. Some truths are better delivered in soft wrappers. I cracked the window a sliver and listened as best I could. I heard Max's voice, wounded performance. I heard Lena stairs on command. I heard the other man's, the one from the unknown car clipped professional, as if reading from notes. Mr. Weber's reply cut through like a clean knife. You have been asked not to be on this property. Further contact goes through my office. This is not a negotiation. There are moments when dignity arrives wearing someone else's suit. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass and let my shoulders drop. The officers walked them back to their cars. Doors slammed, engines turned over, the little parade pulled away, and the street returned to itself. Mr. Weber came to my porch, and we spoke through the chain. He didn't ask me to open it. He respected that metal line for what it meant. We'll file for a permanent order, he said. Tomorrow I want you to come by my office with a timeline. Bring the ledger you made. Bring copies of your bank changes. The court respects people who respect their own paper. I have learned to respect my paper, I said, and the sentence made him smile. When he left, I closed the door, engaged every lock, and stood still in the hallway for a long time. The house felt like a living thing, a spine straightening, a breath taken all the way to the bottom. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and drank it standing up because sitting felt like surrender. Then, I turned off the lights and went to bed. In the morning, I woke before the alarm. The air had that peculiar clarity that comes after a storm no one else heard. I stood at the window and watched the sun turn the neighbor's roof pink. I pressed both palms against the glass and said aloud to the empty room, "You are safe with me." The phone buzzed once, a known number, and stopped. Then again, then a third time. I let it. If the world wanted me, it could leave a message. At 9, a knock. Not a rap of anger this time, but a crisp, practiced knock. 3 beats, a breath, 3 beats. I knew the rhythm without knowing the name for it. Authority, procedure, a woman's voice through the door. Clear, professional. Good morning, Mrs. Richter. I'm with Senior Services. We received a report and need to conduct a wellness check. I closed my eyes and thought, of course, when guilt and theft fail, they call kindness with a clipboard. I took a breath that reached my feet, straightened my sweater, and slid the chain into place. Show me your identification through the window, I said. My voice was calm. My hands did not shake. I had spent months proving I wasn't crazy to myself. Now I would prove it to a stranger with forms. And while she opened her folder, I called Mr. Weber because this time I would not be kind without witnesses. The boundary call and the lawyer in the living room. The woman at the door adjusted her badge so I could read it through the glass. Schmidt, Clara, Office of Senior Services. The badge was real. The expression was practiced kindness, the kind that had seen too much and now lived halfway between sympathy and suspicion. Mrs. Richter, she said, we've had a report that you may be in an at-risk situation. May I come in for a quick conversation? There was the phrasing again. It was the polite cousin of incompetent. I unlatched the chain halfway. You may step into the hall. I'll call my attorney before we speak. Her brows twitched. That's not necessary. This is informal. It's necessary, I said, already dialing Mr. Weber. When he answered, I handed her the phone. My lawyer would like to confirm your visit. She hesitated, then took it. I watched her listen, watched the color shift in her face as he explained clearly, firmly, that I was under representation and that any conversation would be recorded for documentation. When she handed the phone back, her tone had changed. The gentleness was no longer a net. Of course, Mrs. Richter, she said, may we sit? We sat in the living room that had hosted 1,000 small betrayals. The air still smelled faintly of furniture, polish, and burnt coffee. She began with the script. We've received statements suggesting you've been isolating, showing unusual financial behavior, and that you may have refused necessary medical help. I just need to make sure you're safe. Safe. Another elastic word that stretches to fit the shape of whoever's holding it. I spoke evenly. I have canceled financial transfers that were being abused. I live alone by choice, not neglect. I drive, cook, and manage my own finances. My medical chart is current, and my doctor of 30 years would confirm that I take no medication but vitamins. You may look at my kitchen. You'll find food. You may look at my car. You'll see gas and registration. What you will not find here is confusion. She blinked, taken slightly aback by the order of my recital. May I ask why you installed security cameras? To keep record of the people who keep forgetting they are not welcome, I said. Would you like to see the footage of them arriving with a lawyer 2 nights ago? She declined with a quick shake of the head, pen scratching on her form. I knew then that she had already realized what this was. Of those family cases where love is measured in inheritance rather than affection. Her tone softened. Do you have social support, Mrs. Rick? Friends or neighbors you see regularly? Yes, Mrs. Brooks next door, and a small group of women from our garden club. We meet weekly. They can confirm I am lucid, hydrated, and capable of laughing at bad jokes. That last line earned a real smile. She closed her folder. I'll note that you are entirely I'm sorry for the intrusion. I walked her to the door. Before she stepped out, she said quietly, if they contact us again, the file will show that you were evaluated as stable. You have the right to privacy, even from family. Especially from family, I said. When she left, the house filled again with a deep, gentle quiet, but peace rarely stays unchallenged. My phone rang within the hour. Mr. Weber's name flashed on the screen. They're escalating, he said without greeting. They've filed a petition for guardianship. For a moment the words were just sound, then meaning arrived like a bruise forming under the skin. Guardianship, the legal erasure of adulthood. They're saying you refuse psychiatric evaluation, he continued. They're building a case for mental incompetence. But don't panic, we'll answer with documentation your bank activity, your doctor's statement, and the evaluation I've arranged with Dr. Moore. She's thorough and incorruptible. I'm tired, Mr. Weber, I admitted. I know, but you're also winning. They wouldn't fight this hard if you weren't free. After the call, I stood at the window. Across the street, a curtain shifted in Mr. Davis's house. The same neighbor who had always complained about park. His silhouette lingered, phone in hand. Another witness prepared, perhaps. I wrote the day's events in a notebook. 11 a.m. social worker visit. 2 p.m. guardianship petition filed. 3 p.m. neighbor, watching again. Every line was proof that I existed clearly enough to record the truth. At sunset, I brewed chamomile tea and sat at the kitchen table, reading old letters from my husband. In one he had written, "You've always mistaken kindness for duty. Learn the difference before it costs you more than money." I had not listened then. I was listening now. The doorbell rang again, 2 quick rings this time. My heart thudded, but when I checked the camera, it was Eleanor, holding a pie. I let her in. I heard the police last night, she said, eyes sharp with concern. I just wanted to make sure you're all right. I'm all right, I said, and realized it was true. They're trying to declare me unfit. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Then we'll be your witnesses. All of us. They'll regret mistaking age for weakness. We drank tea and planned quietly names of everyone who could testify. Copies of every receipt, every email, every unanswered message that proved manipulation. For the first time, I was not fighting alone. When she left, I sat by the window again. Across the street, Mr. Davis's lights were off, but the glow of a cigarette pulsed in the dark, watching, always watching. I smiled to myself. Let them watch. Let them see a woman who refuses to disappear. Tomorrow I would face their psychiatrist, their lies, their paperwork, but I had something stronger than all three. I had the truth, written in my own steady hand, and I had no intention of surrendering it. The boundary call and the lawyer in the living room, Marvin, arrived with the sound of cautious hope, the kind that hides inside sunlight. I got dressed with the precision of someone heading to battle but calling it an appointment. Mr. Weber picked me up outside the house, briefcase on his lap, determination in his eyes. You'll meet Dr. Moore today, he said. Be honest, be yourself. She's seen enough manipulation to spot the truth in seconds. The office was quiet, full of soft blues and steady clocks. Dr. Moore shook my hand firmly, not the delicate grip of someone humoring an elderly woman, but the handshake of equals. For 2 hours, she asked questions, not to trap me, but to see if I was still living inside my own life. What year is it? Who's the president? How do you handle your finances? What would you do if your bank card was stolen? I answered all of them calmly, but my real answer was in the steadiness of my tone, in the fact that I no longer apologized for existing. When she finished, she leaned back and smiled softly. Mrs. Richter, your cognitive function is exceptional. I'll write a full report confirming your competence. You've been through emotional abuse, not mental decline. The words landed like a small rescue boat after a long storm. Outside, Mr. Weber was waiting. Well, he asked. She says I'm fine, I replied, but I think I've known that all along. He chuckled. Then we'll make sure the court knows it too. That night, I walked through my house slowly. Every step echoed like a new beginning. I had changed my locks, installed cameras, canceled transfers, rebuilt boundaries, and faced a lawyer, a social worker, and my own child, and I was still standing. The war they'd started was turning into their mirror, because when greedy people run out of your money, they run into their own reflection. Days passed, and the house began to feel like a sanctuary again. Eleanor came over often, bringing tea and laughter. She introduced me to her garden club friends, women, who had their own stories of betrayal and survival. We would sit on my porch in the evenings, swapping confessions like war medals. Maria had cut off a brother who treated her pension like his paycheck. Carmen had faced a daughter who called her selfish for keeping her savings. Alfreda, the oldest of us, had rewritten her will 3 times, the last one entirely for charity. They called us the inheritance widows. I liked that. We had buried illusions, not husbands, but calm rarely lasts when money is the god people worship. A week later, Mr. Weber called again. "They've filed a formal lawsuit," he said. "They're accusing you of incompetence in family court." The words were cold, procedural, but the betrayal was personal. "My son is suing me," I whispered, "for being sane." "Let them," he said gently. "We'll bring the truth. Bring your notes, Dr. Moore's evaluation, your receipts. You'll speak, and I'll have to listen." So I did. The day of the hearing, I wore my black suit, the same one I had bought for my husband's funeral. It still fit perfectly, maybe because grief and strength weigh the same. The courtroom smelled of paper and old air. Max avoided my eyes. Lena didn't. Hers burned with the cold certainty of someone who still believed control could be won with cruelty. Their lawyer painted a picture of me as a lonely, paranoid woman being manipulated by outsiders. He used words like delusional, erratic, and unstable. Each word was a nail he thought would seal my coffin. When it was my turn, I spoke without notes. "I am not confused," I said softly. "I am tired. Tired of paying for love that never existed. I paid for rent, food, cars, clothes, even the wedding I wasn't invited to. $33,400 of trying to buy a relationship that was never for sale." I paused, letting silence settle like truth does when it finally finds air. "I am not incompetent. I am independent, and that's what they can't stand." Then Dr. Moore testified, and Mr. Weber presented documents. Every accusation collapsed like paper soaked in water. When the judge returned after deliberation, the room froze. He looked at me with a kind of quiet respect. "Mrs. Richter," he said, "you are in full possession of your faculties. The petition for guardianship is denied." I exhaled, slowly, deliberately. Lena's face fell. Max looked at the floor. For a moment, I almost pitied him, the boy I once carried, now lost inside his own greed. Outside the courthouse, Eleanor was waiting with the others from the garden club. They clapped softly when they saw me. Mr. Weber smiled. "You didn't just win a case," he said. "You won yourself back." That night, I poured a glass of wine, the good one, the bottle I'd been saving for special occasions. I toasted the woman I used to be, the one who mistook obedience for love, the one who gave everything until there was nothing left. She deserved a funeral, not shame. So I buried her quietly in memory, and promised the new me a different life. The next morning, I packed 3 boxes, essentials, photographs, letters from my husband, and called a realtor. Within months, I sold the house and moved into a small apartment near the city center. The walls were white, the air light, the silence chosen. I donated half my savings to an organization that protects elders from financial abuse. The other half, I kept for myself, for travel, for art, for living. Eleanor helped me decorate. Cynthia, my hairstylist, insisted on giving me a new look to match the new life. We laughed, and for the first time in years, the laughter didn't have an apology hiding inside it. Sometimes, late at night, I think of Max and Lena. I've heard they had to move to a smaller apartment, that she finally found work, that he is learning what bills feel like when they're in his own name. Maybe hardship will teach them what my generosity never could. And as I stand on my balcony, watching the city lights blink like distant stars, I realize that I am not alone. I am accompanied by peace, the quiet kind that doesn't ask for anything back. Freedom feels strange at first, like a room too big after years in a cage. But what came next wasn't just peace, it was discovery. Because once you stop paying for other people's lives, you finally start living your own. The new beginning, reclaiming life after betrayal the first morning after the court ruling, felt unreal to quiet, to clean, almost suspicious in its peace. For years I had woken up to alarms that were never mine, rent reminders, transfer alerts, messages that began with please and ended with soon. Now there was only sunlight spilling through the curtains and the faint hum of the city below. For a moment I didn't move. I just listened to the sound of freedom, soft, unassuming, without apology. It's strange how silence can feel heavier than noise when you've spent your life earning it. I poured coffee, sat by the window, and realized I could finally taste it without the bitterness of obligation. I thought of the courtroom, again, the smell of paper, the scrape of chairs, the judge's voice cutting through years of manipulation with one steady sentence: petition denied. That echo would stay with me forever, not because of the victory but because it proved I had not imagined my sanity. For months they'd tried to convince me I was unstable, irrational, old, but it turns out clarity was never the problem. Kindness was. I made a promise to myself that morning. No more rescues disguised as love. No more apologies for saying no. No more shrinking to make others comfortable. By noon, I was already making changes. I packed away the old photographs, the ones that looked like affection but were really accounting entries of generosity. Every frame that showed a smiling Max or a grateful Lena felt like counterfeit currency. I replaced them with pictures of places I'd always wanted to see: Florence, Vienna, the Norwegian fjords. When Eleanor arrived that afternoon, she found me surrounded by travel brochures and a grin I hadn't worn in decades. Planning an escape, she teased, setting a basket of pastries on the table. Not escape, I said. A return. To what? To myself, she laughed. That deep, approving laugh only older women have, the kind that carries both pride and warning. Just remember to pack good shoes. Self-discovery takes walking. We spent the rest of the day rearranging furniture, dragging old memories out to the curb. The sofa Max once spilled wine on during an argument gone. The armchair where Lena had sat, pretending to help me balance my check. By sunset, the living room looked like a stranger's house. Bare, honest, breathing. I felt lighter, but liberation has a way of leaving you dizzy. It's easy to mistake emptiness for loss when you've lived so long in clutter. Eleanor noticed. You'll fill it with better things, she said, squeezing my shoulder. The right kind of company never needs your money. That night I made dinner for one, nothing fancy. Just soup and bread, but every bite felt ceremonial. I wasn't feeding disappointment anymore. I was feeding survival. After eating, I walked out onto the balcony. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain and streetlights warming the asphalt. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine the future without the weight of someone else's expectations. The thought terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. I whispered into the night, "Robert, I think I'm finally free." The words didn't echo, they landed softly, like they belonged. The next morning, I booked my first trip, a week in Vienna. It wasn't about sightseeing, it was about proving that I could step on a plane without checking anyone's needs first. Eleanor insisted on driving me to the airport. She wore her gardening hat the entire way, saying it made her feel adventurous. When we hugged goodbye, she said something I'll never forget. "Remember, Renata, when the plane lifts off, so does the weight." As the city shrank below the window, I felt my heart do something strange. It laughed. In Vienna, I walked until my legs ached. I visited every art gallery, every cafe, every small corner where life hummed quietly. No one called me mom. No one needed rent. No one reminded me of obligation. I was anonymous, and for the first time, anonymity felt like grace. Every evening I'd sit by the Danube with a notebook, writing little letters to the woman I used to be. I told her that forgiveness wasn't weakness, it was closure. That loneliness was better than being surrounded by people who erased you. And that aging doesn't mean fading, it means refining. By the time I boarded the flight home, I no longer felt like a victim of betrayal. I felt like a survivor of misplaced loyalty. But peace has its own tests. Freedom doesn't silence the ghosts, it invites them to speak. And when I returned home, the phone was waiting, humming with a message I didn't expect, from Max. The new beginning, reclaiming life after betrayal. The voicemail began with the sound of hesitation, the tiny inhale a liar takes before deciding which version of the truth to sell. "Mom," Max said, his voice lower than I remembered. "I heard about the ruling. I want to talk. Maybe we could meet for coffee." For a moment, I almost laughed. Coffee, after years of devouring my savings, after lawyers and false diagnoses. He was offering caffeine as reconciliation. I deleted the message but kept the echo. It followed me around the house all day, whispering questions I didn't want to answer. Could people change? Did sons ever come home without their hands out? That night I dreamed of him as a child's small hands clutching my sleeve in a grocery store, terrified of being lost. When I woke, I realized I was the one who had been lost, wandering in the aisles of motherhood, long after he'd grown tall enough to see the exits. I made tea and watched the sunrise turn the street gold. The world looked new, and I wasn't going to repaint it with old colors, so I called Mr. Weber. The New Beginning, Reclaiming Life After Betrayal, Part 3 of 3. It was tucked deep in the drawer, under years of receipts and expired warranties. A pale blue check, dated the week of the wedding. Pay to the order of Max Richter $5,000. Memo line, for your future, with love. My handwriting looked younger, still convinced that generosity could build bridges. I held it up to the light. The paper had yellowed, the ink softened, but the signature was steady. $5,000 that never left my account, an uncashed promise, sleeping under layers of forgotten faith. And with that small rectangle of paper came a flood of memory. The phone call before the wedding, Lena's voice, bright with charm. We might need a little extra for the photographer. It's such a once-in-a-lifetime moment, Renata. I had smiled, reached for the checkbook, and written the number without hesitation. Even then, a quiet corner of my heart whispered, "You're buying a ticket to your own exclusion." I'd ignored it, the way women are taught to ignore inner alarms when kindness is expected. Now, standing in my new apartment, I finally listened to that voice. I tore the check cleanly in half, then in half again. For equal pieces, like quarters of a circle finally broken open, I let them fall into the trash and whispered, "You got enough?" After that, healing became practical. I joined a writing group that met in a small cafe on Thursdays, mostly widows, mostly women like me who'd survived quiet wars behind closed doors. We didn't trade pity, we traded paragraphs. When it was my turn to read, I told the story not as confession, but as craft. I changed the names, softened the edges, but the truth was intact. A woman who mistook love for obligation and sanity for surrender. When I finished, the room stayed silent for a moment. Then a woman across the table said, "You just wrote what half of us lived." That's when I realized storytelling wasn't therapy, it was witness. I began writing every morning, the way other people pray. Pages filled with small victories, the taste of independence, the courage of boundaries, the strange joy of solitude. Mr. Weber read one of my drafts and said, "You know, this could help others. There's funding for elder advocacy projects that tell personal stories." And that's how I found myself, months later, on a small stage at a community center, microphone trembling in my hand. Dozens of faces, some young, some lined like mine, watched as I began. "My name is Renata Richter." I was declared competent by a court of law, but the real verdict came from myself. Laughter, applause, the good kind. When I finished, a young woman approached, eyes glassy. "My mother is going through the same thing," she said. "You just gave me words to help her fight." I hugged her and thought, this is what survival is for, to light the path behind you. By the first anniversary of the court case, Vienna called again. Eleanor and I went together this time. We walked along the Danube, shared cakes so rich it defied guilt, and watched the sunset turn the river copper. "You know," she said, "they'll never understand what you took back from them." "I don't need them to," I replied. "It wasn't theirs to understand." She raised her glass. "To freedom, to self-respect," I said, and we clinked gently. When I returned home, I found another envelope in the mailbox. Max's handwriting again. I didn't open it. I took it straight to the fireplace, slid it between the logs, and watched the edges curl. Paper burns faster than guilt. The flame caught, brief and bright. And for a moment I saw every version of myself that had ever said yes when I meant no. They flickered, bowed, and vanished into ash. I sat back, the room glowing gold, and thought, freedom isn't loud, it's quiet enough to hear yourself breathe. But peace doesn't erase the past, it only gives it softer edges. And just when I thought the story had ended, the phone rang again. This time, not from Max but from a lawyer I didn't know. Someone claiming my late husband's company still held a secret account in my name. "Max reached out," I said. He sighed, a sound halfway between warning and empathy. "He'll try again, Renata. They always do when the money runs out." "What should I do?" "Exactly what you're doing now. Nothing without proof of respect. Let silence do the teaching." I spent the next weeks living that lesson. I took long walks with Eleanor. We wandered through markets, comparing fruits and fabrics, laughing about nothing. Sometimes the other women from the garden club joined us. They called me the Phoenix, which embarrassed me until I realized they meant it. Cynthia, the stylist, talked me into a short haircut. "You look 10 years younger," she said. "No," I told her, catching my reflection in the mirror. "I just looked like myself at last." In the evenings, I painted again. Not flowers or landscapes this time, but shapes, circles that closed cleanly, lines that didn't trail off. Every brushstroke felt like punctuation at the end of an old sentence. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived handwritten, blue ink, my son's name on the envelope. I sat with it for a long time before opening it, running my thumb over the seal as if it were a wound. Inside, "Mom, I know I've made mistakes. Lena says we went too far. We miss you. Maybe we could start over." The words looked sincere, but sincerity printed on paper still costs less than rent. There was no apology for the lawsuit, no mention of the money, no admission of the cruelty, just nostalgia packaged as forgiveness. I folded the letter once, twice, then placed it in the drawer with my legal documents, proof that even after defeat, manipulation can write love notes. That evening, Eleanor dropped by with dinner. We ate on the balcony, the sky bruised with sunset. She noticed the envelope. "From him, yes, and I filed it where it belongs with the evidence." She smiled sadly. "That's progress, dear. The opposite of love isn't hate's documentation." We laughed until the streetlights came on. Later that night, when the world was quiet, I reread Robert's old letters again. He'd written, "One day, you'll have to choose between being loved and being free. Pick freedom. Love can follow." I whispered to the memory. I finally did. For the first time, the house felt too small for my heart. Freedom expands you, and walls that once protected begin to feel like limits. So I decided to sell the old house completely and start fresh. Mr. Weber helped with the paperwork. Eleanor promised to help pack. When I told the garden club, they clapped like I'd announced an engagement. "You're marrying yourself," Elfrida said, "and you'd better stay faithful." We all laughed, but I knew she was right. The next morning, I made a list of everything I would take. My husband's letters, my paintings, the dress I'd never worn, the piece I'd finally earned, the past everything else could belong to the past. The call came just moving after dusk, meant closing when the apartment was quiet enough to hear the clock don't wait for permission. A man boxed up my life. "Careful, I found something buried at the back of a drawer at your late husband may have left with our firm. Never cashed. In 3 sentences, dated on his wedding week, cracked, and with it came a memory that refused on a winter river solid, until a sound you've been avoiding walks across it." I didn't answer right away. I let him fill the silence with credentials and dates. "We represent Hafner and Sons, your husband's former employer. During a records audit, a deferred compensation account surfaced under your name as beneficiary." The words were cold, antiseptic, almost apologetic for existing. "Send it in writing," I said. My voice surprised me, calm with a locked door behind it. An email arrived before I set the phone down. Letterhead, signatures, a balance that made the room tilt slightly. Not a fortune, not a fairy tale enough to feel like sunlight through blinds you'd forgotten how to open. A note in the scan, unclaimed for more than a decade. Proof of identity required. Timeline for release. Below that, a name that anchored the whole story to the ground. Robert Rick. I called Mr. Weber. He read the email twice, then a third time the way men read maps at night. "Looks legitimate," he said, "but we don't move until we verify every brick. Scammers use grief like a crowbar." "I know," I said. "I've been pried before." The next morning we visited the firm. Glass walls, polite reception, a conference room that smelled faintly of toner and new carpet. A woman in a navy suit introduced herself as their compliance officer. She slid a folder toward me, and there it was again. Proof. Memos bearing Robert's careful initials, a plan he'd signed the year before he died. Contributions he'd tucked away like notes into a coat he knew I would someday wear. "Your husband designated the funds for you alone," she said. "No contingent beneficiaries. It appears the account was separated from the main pension during a corporate transition and never paid out. Our audit recovered it." I traced the edge of the paper with my fingertip. Robert had always loved lists, columns, the way order soothed chaos. Even dying, he'd been tidy with love. "We'll need identity verification and a new account for transfer," the officer added. "There's one more thing." She lifted a small envelope from the folder, old-fashioned, addressed in hand. This was stored with the file. The handwriting pulled the room closer. Renat, not Mrs. Richter, not a title, just my name, as he said it on quietly glorious Tuesdays. The seal had been slit by company policy. I looked to Mr. Weber. He nodded once. Inside, a single page. If you're reading this, the world outlived my excuses. I wanted there to be something that wasn't touched by anyone's opinion, especially our sons. Use it for what makes you you. If you ever feel you're buying love, put your wallet down and take your life back. Ah. My breath left and returned changed. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my purse beside my keys, as if both were now required to get home. We completed the forms. Compliance took copies of my ID. Mr. Weber requested a written confirmation of the designation and transfer timeline. I requested something different, permission to sit a moment and stare at the corner of the room until my heart matched the news. The officer pretended to check a calendar and left us alone. Why do I feel guilty for being relieved? I asked. Because you were taught to justify oxygen, he said gently. Breathe anyway. Back home, I made tea and set Robert's letter on the table like a guest. Sun moved across it, warming the ink as if heat could wake his voice. I thought of the years I'd spent bankrolling other people's comfort, how I'd equated sacrifice with sainthood. He'd known I might do that. He'd written for the woman he loved, not the mother I performed. Use it for what makes you you. I opened a new notebook and wrote a list, not the frightened lists of the last year, locks to change, accounts to secure. This one was lit from within. Paint without apologizing for the price of brushes. Travel where grief doesn't speak the language. Fund one thing that protects women like me. Leave nothing, unclaimed money, name, or hour. The kettle clicked. The apartment exhaled. That's when the phone vibrated on the counter, insistently, as if it had smelled the ink drying. Max. I turned the phone face down and let it hum once, then twice, like an animal pawing at a closed door. The third vibration was a message. Saw something about Hafner on your email preview. What's going on? We should talk. I can help manage it. The word help sat on the screen like a spider. I breathed, counted to 10, then to myself. I did not answer. The next day was paperwork. Hafner sent the formal letter. Mr. Weber reviewed every clause. We opened a fresh account at a bank Max didn't know existed. One with a pin phrase only. I would remember something my husband and I once joked about in a grocery aisle. I signed my name in a dozen places and felt it grow larger with every loop. A week later, compliance called to confirm the transfer date. There was a hold, a standard check, the way institutions act like nervous chaperones. It didn't frustrate me. Caution keeps wolves from looking like dogs. Eleanor knocked that afternoon with oranges and stubborn, joyful eyes. I told her everything. She listened like a cliff-solid patient, older than the storm. When I read Robert's letter aloud, she put a hand over mine and squeezed. What will you do first? She asked. Paint, I said, and then give some away. To whom? 2 women who think their worth is the interest on someone else's loan. We built a plan with the care of gardeners, a small fund, local, simple, no hoops that shamed people for asking. A lawyer to structure it so no predator could sniff it out. A name that wasn't mine. I didn't want to be thanked. I wanted women to get to leave. At dusk we took the letter to the balcony. The sky was a low fire. Eleanor handed me a pen. Write him back, she said. Even if the post is only the air. I wrote, I found it. Thank you for knowing me past my habits. I'm using it for what makes me me. We ate oranges until our fingers smelled like sun. The transfer cleared on a Tuesday. Money moved the way rivers do when no one dams them, quietly, insistently, true to gravity. Mr. Weber texted a single check mark and a champagne emoji that made me laugh out loud at my kitchen table. I poured a glass of the good bottle, the one I'd been hoarding for a holiday that didn't belong to anyone else. I raised it to the ceiling. Robert, I said, I am using this with both hands. That evening a letter appeared under my door, no stamp, no envelope. My name scratched in hurried ink. I heard about the account. We should talk about responsibilities. This family has needs. Don't make this ugly Max. I sat with the paper a long time. Once, a note like that would have sent me to the bank in apology, to the mirror in shame. Now it sent me to the file cabinet. I slid his message into a plastic sleeve labeled evidence, financial pressure, and closed the drawer gently. The way you close the lid on a past that still tries to breathe. The next morning, Mr. Weber filed for a harassment extension tied to the existing order. He advised me not his legal voice, but his older brother voice. No answers, no meetings, all communication in writing through counsel. I agreed. I'd learned the hard lesson that not everything requiring your attention deserves it. Free of the immediate noise, I did the one thing no one could monetize. I painted. Large canvas, unapologetic color, a circle that closed itself without asking permission, a horizon that refused to be straight because rivers aren't. When the last stroke landed, I didn't cry. I stepped back and nodded to the woman who had made it. She looked like me without the weight. A week later, we launched the fund quietly, through a community center bulletin board and a nurse Eleanor knew, who always saw too much at discharge. Small grants, groceries that didn't ask where you'd been, a locksmith paid in advance, a bus ticket out. The first woman who came in didn't make eye contact. She left with a receipt stamped paid and a cab waiting. When the door closed behind her, I pressed my hand to my sternum and felt something catch there, then settle. Not pride, relief made holy. That night, I took Robert's letter from my purse and read it again, not because I needed permission, because gratitude tastes better when said aloud. I set the paper under a small stone on my desk, a promise anchored. Before sleep, the phone lit up one more time. A new number, no words. Just a photo of a sonogram I hadn't asked for, and a message from an old adversary made sudden mother. We thought you should know. It's time to be a family. The implications slid into the room like a draft. I turned the phone face down and watched the ceiling gather the day's last light. The past would always knock. The future had begun without it. A secret account had returned what was mine. A new life had taught me how to keep it. But the picture on my screen carried a question I couldn't ignore. When new blood enters an old wound, do you open the door? Finally learn how to lock it without guilt. The new air, blood and boundaries. The sonogram photo stayed on my screen like a dare. For a full minute I watched the ghost-shaped curve inside that gray blur. The proof of a heartbeat I didn't create but was somehow expected to save. Lena's message followed. We thought you should know. It's time to be a family again. No apology. No memory of courtrooms or forged papers, just a new word for leverage. Grandmother. I placed the phone face down on the table and looked at the half-finished canvas in front of me. The paint was still wet. A red line cut through a blue horizon. I'd been painting freedom all month, but freedom has a pulse and sometimes it kicks. I called Eleanor first. She didn't gasp or scold. She just said, they'll try to wrap the baby in forgiveness and hand it to you like a leash. I laughed, bitter and short. You think I'd fall for that? You won't, she said, but your heart might. That night I walked along the river path until the city lights looked like candle flames trembling on water. I whispered to the dark, I will love that child, but I will not fund another lesson in greed. The wind carried the words away, but I felt lighter for having said them. 2 weeks later, an official envelope arrived, no handwriting this time, just bureaucracy in bold. A petition for modification of guardianship restrictions due to familial reconciliation. It was clever. The court couldn't reopen the old case, but it could review the boundaries if I consented. Mr. Weber read it, sighed, and said, they've found religion in paperwork again. We drafted a response, simple enough to slice through pretense. The undersigned maintains full autonomy, all communications through counsel. Emotional appeals are not evidence. Still, the idea of a grandchild unsettled me. At night, I caught myself wondering what its cry would sound like, what name they would choose, whether it would inherit Robert's eyes. Guilt is a language you never forget. Even silence speaks it fluently. To quiet the noise, I threw myself into work with the foundation we'd built. Applications poured in, women with stories like mine, each one an echo of the life I'd escaped. We helped a retired teacher reclaim her pension from a nephew who'd drained it. We bought new locks for a widow whose son kept borrowing her spare keys. Every rescue steadied me. Every signature reminded me what protection should look like. One afternoon, a young volunteer came in carrying files. Someone dropped us off, she said. No name, just an address label. Inside, an ultrasound copy, a baby's hospital band, and a note in Lena's handwriting. Born early. His name is Robert. He'll never know you unless you choose otherwise. The paper trembled between my fingers. The name hit harder than I expected. Robert Tafta, the man who had left me letters instead of debts. I set the note down and breathed until my pulse matched the clock. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the foundation's account and scheduled a monthly anonymous donation to the neonatal ward listed on the form. Help without contact. Love without surrender. Months passed. Seasons turned the river from silver to ice to mirror again. The messages dwindled, then stopped. The last one came near Christmas. He smiled today. You'd like him. I did not answer, but I whispered, I already do. 1 year later, the foundation hosted an exhibit of paintings by survivors mine. Among them, the title of my piece, Inheritance, a circle, whole and unbroken, painted in quiet colors. A small handprint in the corner, no larger than memory. People stopped and stared. Some cried. Eleanor squeezed my shoulder and murmured, "You built a family anyway, just not the one they planned." I smiled. Family, I'd learned, isn't blood. It's boundaries kept sacred. The gallery lights glowed warm on the canvas, and for the first time in my life, legacy felt clean. When the night ended, I went home, poured a glass of wine, and read Robert's letter once more. Use it for what makes you you. But even healed wounds itch when storms change pressure. Months later, an invitation arrived from a lawyer in Vienna. Robert's company wanted me to attend a memorial for the employees he'd mentored. I told myself it was closure. I didn't know it would open the final chapter of our story. The last letter, closure in Vienna. The envelope was heavy, embossed with gold trim, and smelled faintly of old paper and lavender glue, the scent of formality. It came from Hafner & Sons, the same firm that had unearthed Robert's hidden account. Inside was a folded invitation, polite and distant. The board of Hafner & Sons cordially invites Mrs. Renata Richter to attend a private memorial honoring Robert A. Richter and the colleagues who helped build the company's legacy. Venue, Vienna Conservatory Hall. Date, May 14th. At the bottom, a handwritten note in blue ink. "He spoke of you often." I sat at my desk for a long time, the letter trembling slightly between my hands. Vienna, the city that had given me back my breath. The thought of returning there felt like circling back to the start of a novel I'd already finished. But closure, like grief, never asks for permission. That night, I opened Robert's last letter again, the one he'd hidden in that corporate folder years ago. I traced the ink with my finger and whispered, "You hid love in ledgers. Maybe I can find you in a hall of strangers." The flight to Vienna was quiet. I watched the clouds roll below like folded linen sheets. There was something poetic about it, the altitude of reflection. I had no fear this time, no guilt in spending money, no anxiety about who might be waiting for me. The world finally belonged to no one but itself. When I arrived, a black car from the firm was waiting. The driver, a kind-eyed man named Jonas, carried my bag and said softly, "Your husband trained my father. He was strict but fair. Strict but fair." It sounded exactly like Robert. The words wrapped around me like an old song. The hotel was small, elegant, quiet. A vase of tulips stood on the nightstand with a note, "Welcome home." I hadn't called Vienna home before, but maybe the universe was offering a metaphor. The memorial was held in a hall that looked older than its music. The chandeliers shone like captured dawn, and the air carried the scent of polish and history. People gathered in muted tones, black suits, pearls, papers folded neatly in trembling hands. On stage stood a portrait of Robert, a younger version, smiling slightly, eyes alive with calculation and kindness. Seeing it struck me with an ache both tender and sharp. A speaker began, recounting the company's milestones. My husband's name threaded through the sentences like a refrain. Visionary, mentor, meticulous. Each praise felt like a breadcrumb leading me back to the man behind the paperwork. When the speeches ended, a young woman approached. She introduced herself as Anna, one of Robert's former interns. "He changed my life," she said. "He taught me that integrity is just clarity under pressure." Her words hit harder than she knew. Robert had always said that clarity under pressure. It was what I had become without realizing I'd been taught. After the event, the company's director, an older man with silver-rimmed glasses, handed me a small box. "This was found in one of Robert's drawers during the archive renovation," he explained. "It's addressed to you." Inside was a single fountain pen, the one he used to sign contracts. A thin strip of paper was tied around it. "For the stories you'll write when you remember you were always the author." I laughed quietly, tears gathering behind the sound. Even from beyond the veil of time, Robert still knew how to hand me courage, disguised as stationery. That night, I walked along the Danube again. The city lights shimmered on the water, just like the first time I'd been here. Except now, I wasn't running from betrayal. I was walking beside memory, not drowning in it. I found a bench overlooking the river and wrote in my journal, "Closure isn't silence. It's when the story finally looks you in the eye and bows." When I finished, I signed my name with Robert's pen. The ink flowed effortlessly, as if it had been waiting for my hand all along. The next morning, before my flight, I stopped by a small bookstore near the cathedral. In the window display sat a collection titled Letters to the Living. I bought it, thinking Robert would have liked the irony. On the flight home, I read the last passage aloud under my breath. Those who leave us don't disappear. They move into our sentences, waiting for us to find the courage to keep writing. I smiled. I found it, I whispered. Back home, I hung Robert's pen in a small glass frame above my writing desk, next to my painting Inheritance. The light from the window caught the metal clip and reflected across the wall like a sliver of sunrise. It was enough. 7. But peace has a rhythm, and rhythms invite echoes. A month after returning from Vienna, I received an email from a journalist investigating elder exploitation cases. He wanted to tell my story, all of it, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to let the world see the woman I used to be. The interview telling the story to the world. The email arrived early, stamped with curiosity. Subject: Inquiry, Your Foundation, and Personal Story. The sender's name was Daniel Weiss, investigative journalist, Vienna Post. He wrote with restraint, the way good journalists do when they smell something both fragile and important. Mrs. Richter, I'm researching a feature on financial abuse among seniors. Your foundation's work has saved dozens of women here and abroad. I believe your story could help many more. Would you consider speaking on record? I read it twice, then once more out loud. My first instinct was to say no. The idea of revisiting the pain, of handing it to strangers who would dissect it for headlines, made my stomach tighten. But silence, I realized, is how abuse survives. It hides in polite houses, behind closed accounts, inside words left unsaid. So I replied, yes, but on my terms. Daniel arrived 2 weeks later, tall, gentle, wearing the kind of respect that doesn't need to be announced. He didn't bring a camera crew, only a small recorder, and a notebook that looked as weathered as truth itself. We sat in my living room, the one I'd rebuilt piece by piece. The afternoon light poured in, catching the framed pen above my desk. He noticed it immediately. Roberts, he asked. I nodded. He taught me how to balance a ledger. It just took me 40 years to balance my heart. He smiled softly. That's a good line. May I quote it? You can quote the pain if you also quote the healing. He agreed. For hours, we talked. He didn't rush or pry. He let silence fill the gaps between sentences, giving me time to breathe around the memories. I told him everything: the quiet manipulation, the emotional blackmail, the inheritance meeting, the courtroom, the rediscovered account. I told him about Eleanor, about the foundation, about the women who had found safety because I finally said no. Sometimes he'd pause to ask small, grounding questions. What did the air smell like that day? What color was the folder the lawyer brought? What did it feel like the first night you slept without fear? They weren't details for the article. They were lifelines for the story's soul. When we finished, he closed his notebook and said, "Most people fight for survival. You fought for dignity. That's rarer." I smiled. Survival was instinct. Dignity was a decision. A month later, the article was published. Headline: The Price of Silence. How one woman turned exploitation into empowerment. It spread quickly, not because of scandal, but because truth travels quietly and lands where it's needed. The foundation's inbox overflowed. Letters came from women in cities I'd never seen: Cairo, Manila, Snow, Paulo, all saying the same thing in different languages. Thank you for speaking. The story reached even further than I expected. A financial ethics board contacted us for collaboration. Universities requested guest lectures. A filmmaker from Berlin called, asking to adapt the piece into a short documentary. But fame, I knew, was just another kind of attention, and attention can turn into ownership if you're not careful. So I accepted only one invitation: a small public reading at the Vienna Cultural Forum, the same city that had once given me back my life. The room was modest, filled with students, advocates, and quiet applause. I read from my own journal, the entry I'd written by the river after Robert's memorial. Closure isn't silence, it's when the story finally looks you in the eye and bows. When I finished, no one clapped right away. They just stood, collectively, in a hush that felt like prayer. Later, Daniel joined me backstage. "They want to nominate you for the Aurora Humanitarian Award," he said, half smiling, half nervous. "Do I have your permission to submit your name?" I hesitated. "Awards are for endings. I'm still writing," he laughed. "Then maybe that's exactly why you deserve one." Back home, Eleanor greeted me with a hug that smelled like tea and paint. She held up a small newspaper clipping she'd cut out and framed. The headline wasn't mine, it was the tagline printed beneath it. Love is not alone. She tapped the glass and said, "That one should be on your tombstone." I chuckled. Not yet. I still have a few chapters left. That night, as I turned off the lights, my phone buzzed. An email from an unknown address. Subject: "You don't know me, but my name is Robert. My mother says I'm named after someone who saved her life." A single line, from a boy who couldn't yet know the storms that shaped him. I read it 3 times, heart caught somewhere between ache and peace. Then I typed back, "I didn't save her, Robert. I just learned how to stop sinking." And for the first time, the name felt like legacy, not loss. But even legacy needs a guardian. Months after the article's release, the foundation's finances began showing discrepancies, missing transfers, altered receipts. Someone was stealing from the sanctuary I'd built, and this time, the enemy wasn't family. It was trust itself. The betrayal within when trust breaks twice. I used to think betrayal had a face familiar, predictable, wearing your last name. But this one came dressed in professionalism, in polished emails and audit spreadsheets that didn't add up. It started quietly, the way rot does. A missing receipt here, a double transaction there. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I'd misfiled something. Maybe I was slipping after all. Old fears whispered, the same ones Max and Lena had tried to weaponize. "Are you sure you're still sharp, Renata?" But numbers don't lie. They just wait for you to stop believing in them. I stayed up one night, surrounded by papers, pen tapping the desk like a heartbeat. The foundation's account should have had 147,000 euros. It had 122,424,000 gone. Not a typo, not a glitch, gone. I didn't tell Eleanor right away. She'd been busy organizing the next fundraiser, her eyes full of plans and gratitude. I couldn't shatter that yet. I needed proof, not paranoia. So I called the bank manager. "Mrs. Richter," he said kindly, "those transfers were authorized by your financial officer, Ms. Alvarez." Alvarez, the woman I'd trusted most after Eleanor. The woman I'd hugged when her mother was ill. The one who'd said, "You're like family to me." My hands went cold. Family. That word again. The next morning, I walked into the foundation office early. The air smelled like paper and coffee. Ordinary peace. Ms. Alvarez arrived 20 minutes later, her smile crisp and professional. "Morning, Renata." "Morning," I said softly. "Can we talk in private?" She followed me into my office. I closed the door. On the desk sat the printed bank statements, each page marked in red ink. "Would you like to explain these?" Her smile faltered, but only for a second. "There must be a mistake." 24,000 euros worth of mistakes. She looked down, twisting her ring. "My brother's surgery. I was going to replace it next month. I just needed time." There it was, the same script, the same soft plea that had stolen 3 years of my life before. "Help me, understand me, forgive me." But I wasn't the same woman who used to buy her own erasure to keep others comfortable. "Sit down," I said quietly, "and listen carefully." Her eyes widened. "I founded this place on the ruins of my own exploitation. We exist to protect women from the exact kind of manipulation you just tried. Do you understand the irony of stealing from a sanctuary for survivors?" Tears welled up. I swear I was going to fix it. "No," I interrupted, my voice steady. "You were going to hide it. And the worst part, you knew I would recognize the story because I've lived it." For a moment, the room was silent except for the clock ticking behind her. Then I said the words that once took me 71 years to learn. "I forgive you, but I will not protect you." That afternoon, I called Daniel, the journalist. "I need your help," I said, "but not for another story. For an investigation." He arrived within an hour, recorder off, notepad ready. Together, we traced the missing transfers. Alvarez had set up a ghost supplier, a fake counseling firm, invoices signed under an alias. She hadn't acted alone. One of our newer board members had approved the payments. Eleanor sat in stunned silence when I showed her the evidence. "After everything you've built," she whispered. "After everything we've built," I corrected gently. "But it's not ruined. It's just revealing who doesn't belong here." The police handled the formal complaint. The foundation froze all accounts. When Alvarez was escorted out, she looked back once, her mascara running. "Renata, please, don't destroy my life." "I'm not destroying it," I said. "You already signed the demolition permit." The scandal made the news, but Daniel handled the story with precision. No sensationalism, no pity. Headline: "Sanctuary under siege. how one survivor fought corruption from within. For once, I didn't feel exposed. I felt vindicated. Not every battle is against ghosts from your past. Some are against the reflection of what you used to tolerate. When the dust settled, we rebuilt. The foundation went digital, transparent, every transaction public, every voice heard. The women who came to us no longer saw me as a benefactor. They saw me as proof that recovery doesn't end at escape. One evening, as Eleanor and I closed up, she looked at me across the quiet office. "You know," she said, "you could retire now. You've done enough." I smiled faintly. "If I stop, what do I do with all this clarity?" She laughed softly. "Maybe write another story." I looked at Robert's framed pen again and nodded. Maybe I already am. That night, alone in my kitchen, I poured tea and whispered to the empty room. "You were right, Robert. Integrity is clarity under pressure. And I've never seen clearer." But clarity can be lonely. Weeks later, I received a certified letter from Vienna. Not about finances, not about fraud. It was from a law firm representing Robert Jr., the boy named after my husband. He was 16 now, and he wanted to meet me. The meeting, the boy named Robert. The letter was thin, formal, printed on legal stationery, the kind that makes your stomach tighten before you even read the words. It came from a firm in Vienna I didn't recognize, but the name on the first line froze me in place. On behalf of our client, Robert Schuster, age 16, we request a meeting with Mrs. Renata Richter to discuss matters of personal significance. Personal significance. Such sterile words for something that instantly reopened an old heartbeat. He was Lena's son, Max's boy, the grandchild I'd never met, never held, never spoken to. For years, I'd trained myself to live with that absence, a small, ghost-shaped ache in the corner of every quiet night. Now that absence had written me a letter. I showed it to Eleanor first. She read it silently, then looked up with those clear eyes that always saw beyond the obvious. "You knew this day would come," she said. "I thought it would come when I was ready." "You'll never be ready for blood that carries your name." I smiled sadly. "He doesn't carry my name. He carries their story." Eleanor reached over and placed her hand on mine. "Then maybe it's time he hears yours." We met in Vienna at a small cafe near the museum district, neutral ground, public but quiet. I arrived early, heart steady but fingers trembling. The waiter asked if I wanted coffee. I nodded, but when it came, I couldn't taste it. Then the door opened. A tall boy with soft brown hair and a nervous posture stepped inside, scanning the room. His eyes, Robert's eyes, found mine instantly. "Mrs. Rick?" he asked. I nodded. "You can call me Renata." He smiled faintly, unsure whether to sit or bow or run. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, voice still somewhere between boy and man. We talked about small things first, school, music, the city. He loved piano. He worked part-time at a bookstore. Every time he smiled, I saw fragments of a man who'd once loved me without condition, and a son who'd forgotten how. After a while, his expression shifted. "My mother told me you didn't want to meet me," he said carefully. "I didn't want to meet pain dressed as peace," I replied softly. "But you're not pained. You're possibility." He blinked, trying to process the sentence. "Why did you stop talking to my parents?" I could have given him the polite version. We grew apart. There were misunderstandings, but truth, once buried, grows roots that crack every lie around it. "Because love that demands payment isn't love," I said, "and because I had to learn that even family can treat you like a wallet." He looked down at his hands. "They said you hated them." "I don't hate them," I said. "I outgrew them." Silence stretched between us, not heavy, just honest. He pulled something from his pocket, a folded photograph, creased at the edges. It was the same picture from my foundation article, me at the podium, Robert's pen glinting in the frame behind me. "I read about you," he said. "About everything. I found the article online." I nodded slowly. "And what did you think?" He hesitated. "I think they were wrong about you." Those words hit harder than any apology could. For the first time, I felt the past losing its grip, one generation at a time. We walked along the Danube after that, the same path I'd taken so many times alone. He asked questions about his grandfather, what he was like, what he believed in. I told him Robert believed in precision, kindness, and the quiet strength of doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. The boy listened intently, as if memorizing an inheritance more valuable than money. As we reached the bridge, he stopped. "My mother doesn't know I came," he said. "I assumed that," I replied gently. "She won't understand." "She doesn't have to," I said. Understanding isn't a requirement for forgiveness. He looked out over the water, eyes shining with something fragile, maybe hope. Can I see you again? Yes, I said, but not as my grandson, as yourself. Build who you are, not who they told you to be. He smiled then, a small, genuine thing that looked like sunlight breaking through decades of clouds. When he left, he hugged me, tentative at first, then tighter. It wasn't a claim, it was recognition. And as he walked away, I realized something profound. Redemption doesn't come from apologies. It comes from evolution. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Today, I met the future. He carries their blood but not their poison." I placed the journal beside Robert's pen and whispered to the empty room. Maybe the legacy isn't the money or the name. Maybe it's the courage to start again without repeating the mistakes. But the past has one last echo. It always does. A month after meeting Robert Jr., I received a letter from a hospice in Salzburg. Lena was dying, and she wanted to see me one last time. The last goodbye, Lena's final words. The envelope was pale blue, the same shade as the check I'd once torn in half. No lawyer's seal this time, no stamps of authority, just a trembling handwritten address from Salzburg Hospice, room 217. Inside, a short note in fragile cursive. "Renata, they say I don't have long. I need to see you before I go. Please, Lena." No apology, no explanation, just the kind of plea that arrives too late and still hits the heart like a stone dropped in still water. For an hour I sat there, the letter trembling in my hand, the tea beside me gone cold. Eleanor came in quietly, reading my expression before she even saw the page. She wrote. I nodded. "Will you go?" "I don't know," I whispered. I spent years learning how not to bleed when I hear her name, and now she wants to open the wound herself. Eleanor sat down across from me. Sometimes closure doesn't come from answers. It comes from hearing the question one last time. I drove to Salzburg the next morning. The sky was gray, heavy with snow that hadn't yet fallen. The road curved through mountains like veins through old hands. Every kilometer felt like peeling back another layer of the past. The hospice was quiet, clean, the air tinged with antiseptic and something softer, resignation. A nurse led me to room 217. "She's been waiting since dawn," she said. When I stepped inside, I almost didn't recognize her. Lena, once sharp and immaculate, now looked small under the white sheets, her skin translucent as paper. Her hair had turned silver, her eyes dull but still searching, always searching. "Renata," she breathed, her lips trembling around the name, like it hurt to say it. I nodded but didn't move closer yet. "You wanted to see me." She smiled weakly. "You came." I did. For a moment, the room was just machines and the faint hum of air through the vents. Then she spoke again, her voice thin but steady. "I've had a lot of time to think," she said, "about what we did, what I did." I waited. She turned her head slightly, eyes glistening. "You were right about everything. The greed, the manipulation, the cruelty. I thought love was control. I thought money was proof." Her breathing hitched. "We destroyed everything we touched." "You destroyed yourself," I said quietly. "I just stopped letting you take me with you." A tear slid down her temple. "Max left a year ago. I don't know where he is. He doesn't answer calls. He blames me for everything, does he?" She nodded weakly. "He said I made him that way. Maybe he's right." For the first time, there was no venom in her tone, only exhaustion. "I saw the article," she whispered. "You became what I could never be, free." I pulled the chair closer, not out of sentiment but out of humanity. She looked at me the way drowning people look at shorelines. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, "but I wanted you to know. I named the foundation in my will. The little I have left, it's yours. For the women like me, maybe that will mean something." "It does," I said softly, "not because of the money, because you finally understand what it's for." Her lips trembled into something that almost resembled a smile. "I used to think you were weak," she said, "always giving, always forgiving, but you were just waiting for the right moment to stop." I reached for her hand, cold, fragile, trembling. "Lena," I said quietly, "you don't have to make peace with me. Make peace with yourself." She closed her eyes, her breathing slowing. "I already have," she whispered. I stayed until the machine beside her stopped beeping. No drama, no last gasp, just quiet. A silence so complete it almost sounded like relief. When the nurse came in, I signed the papers, thanked her, and walked outside. The snow had started to fall, small, weightless flakes dissolving on my coat. Each one disappeared before I could feel it. It seemed fitting. That night, I returned to Vienna and lit a candle by Robert's pen. The flame flickered gently, catching the reflection of snow through the window. I whispered, "It's over." And for the first time, the word didn't sound like ending. It sounded like beginning. 2 weeks later, the will arrived. Lena had left everything, what little there was, to the foundation. But attached to the documents was one more envelope, sealed in wax. Inside was a photograph. Lena, Max, and the baby Robert Jr. on the day he was born. On the back, in her fading handwriting, "You were right. Love isn't ownership. Tell him that from me." I placed the photo in my journal, between the pages where I'd written about our first confrontation. The story had come full circle, not in victory, but in understanding. But peace, I learned, isn't permanent. Months after Lena's death, a letter arrived from an unknown return address. No signature, no message inside, just a folded check for $33,400, the exact amount I had once lost. The debt repaid, the circle closes. The envelope looked ordinary, no seal, no sender, no trace of identity. But the moment I held it, something inside me stilled. Paper has a weight memory recognizes. I sat at my desk, staring at the plain white fold for what felt like hours. It was thick enough to hold meaning, thin enough to hold danger. I slit it open with Robert's pen, careful, almost ritualistic. Inside was a single check, made out to Renata Rick. Amount, €33,400. No memo line, no signature I could read. The exact number, down to the last cent. The total of 3 years of generosity, the money I had lost to manipulation, betrayal, and naivety. At first, I laughed, a short, breathless sound that startled even me. Then came the tremor in my hands, not from fear but disbelief. Was this Max, trying for redemption too late? Was it Lena, arranging one final gesture before the end? Or was it fate itself, paying a debt the universe had kept on file? I didn't know, but I did know one thing. I didn't need the money anymore. I called the bank, asked them to trace the sender. The manager said it was wired through an intermediary in Zurich, confidential. No personal ID, only a note attached electronically. What does it say? He paused, reading. Just one sentence, "Ma'am, for what was taken." I closed my eyes. That was all I needed. That night, I sat in my living room surrounded by silence, the soft, benevolent kind. The check lay on the table beside my tea, glowing faintly under the lamplight. It felt almost sacred, like a mirror reflecting every lesson I had learned. For years, I had thought I wanted repayment, justice, balance. But now, staring at that perfect sum, I realized I'd already been paid in something rarer, peace. Still, I couldn't ignore the feeling that the universe had handed me a final choice. What I did next would define not my past, but my legacy. So the next morning, I took the check to the foundation office. Eleanor was sorting through donation letters when she saw my face. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing," I said, handing her the envelope. "Everything's right." She read the check, her eyes widening. "Renata, this is, I know, it's the amount." She exhaled softly. "Do you want to deposit it?" "No," I said. "I want to give it back to the world." We created a new fund that afternoon, the Victor Renewal Grant, a program for elderly women starting over after financial abuse. The rules were simple: no interest, no repayment, no guilt, just a bridge between despair and self-respect. When we announced it, applications poured in within days. One of the first recipients was a woman from Hamburg, 74, recently divorced after decades of control. Her letter ended with the words, "You make me believe in beginning again." I framed that letter beside the check, not as proof of generosity, but as proof that suffering can be recycled into light. Weeks passed. Spring came early that year. The magnolia tree outside my window bloomed in clouds of white and pink, like forgiveness made visible. Each morning I'd sit by the glass, coffee in hand, watching petals fall onto the street like soft punctuation marks to the story I'd been living. And yet, part of me couldn't help but wonder, was it Max? Had he found the strength to repay what he'd taken, not just in money, but in conscience? The thought no longer hurt. It just existed, neutral and distant, like an echo fading over still water. One afternoon, while reviewing grant applications, my assistant walked in with a package. "Anonymous delivery," she said. Inside was a photo, an old one, Max, Lena, and little Robert, taken years before I'd even known of his birth. On the back, written in the same hand as the check, "He's safe. He knows your story. He carries your strength." I smiled, a tear sliding down before I could stop it. That was all I needed. Closure disguised as gratitude. That evening, I visited Robert's grave for the first time in months. The cemetery was quiet, the air soft with spring rain. I placed a small envelope on his headstone. Inside it, a copy of the check marked void, balance restored. I whispered. The rain fell gently, blurring the ink into something that looked almost like forgiveness. As I walked away, I thought about the first time I'd ever cried over losing that money, and how, in the end, it wasn't lost. It had simply taken the long road home. I no longer needed restitution. I had revolution. But the story wasn't quite done. A month later, Daniel called from Vienna with an unexpected proposal. He wanted to publish a book, The Price of Silence, with me as the co-author. The world, he said, was ready to hear everything. Final chapter, The Price of Silence. Daniel's voice over the phone was calm but charged, the kind of tone people use when they know they're about to ask you to reopen a wound. Renata, he said, it's time. Time for what? I asked, though I already knew. For the book. I sat there for a moment, silent, the word book echoing through the kitchen like thunder in an empty church. For 2 years, I had lived my story privately, shared enough to help others, but never all of it. Now he wanted the world to see everything. The humiliation, the courtroom, the betrayal, the rebirth. Daniel, I said slowly, my story isn't just mine, it's full of ghosts. Then, let's turn the ghosts into guides, he replied. The next few months were a blur of memories and ink. Daniel visited twice a week. He'd sit across from me with his recorder and his quiet, patient eyes. Sometimes I would speak for hours without realizing the sun had set. Other times, I'd go completely still, caught in the gravity of a single word: mother, money, forgiveness. He never interrupted. He just waited until I breathed again, then asked softly, are you ready to keep going? I always was. We titled it The Price of Silence, because that's what I'd paid for years, not in money, but in the cost of being quiet about my own suffering. The first chapter began with the line I had once whispered into my empty living room. I thought love was currency, until it bankrupted me. Writing became exorcism. Each page peeled away another layer of shame I didn't realize I still carried. I wrote about the loneliness that lives inside giving. I wrote about the sound of my own phone ringing, that small metallic terror of obligation. I wrote about standing in court, watching my son's face twist between guilt and greed. And I wrote about the morning I woke up and decided I wanted peace more than I wanted to be needed. When the manuscript was finished, Daniel handed me the printed pages. Read it before you sign off, he said. Make sure it's your truth, not my version of it. So, I sat by the window, tea cooling beside me, and read my life in black and white. It didn't hurt the way I expected it to. It felt clean, like rinsing wounds in salt water that finally stopped stinging. At the end of the last chapter, Daniel had added one paragraph I hadn't written. If you're reading this, and you've been told you're difficult, dramatic, or confused for wanting respect, remember, Renata, she was all those things, until she stopped apologizing for them. I looked up at him. You added that? He nodded. It's not your voice, but it's your legacy. I smiled. Then leave it in. The book released quietly. No marketing campaign, no media frenzy. Just word of mouth, the way truth likes to travel. Within weeks, it spread across Europe. Readers sent letters, stories, confessions. Some were heartbreaking, others triumphant. Women and men who had lived silent versions of the same nightmare wrote to say, you gave my pain a name. At first, I tried to reply to every letter, but there were hundreds, then thousands. I realized something. I was no longer the storyteller. I was the chorus. The silence had been broken, and the echoes were louder than any applause. A year later, I stood on a small stage in Berlin, holding a copy of The Price of Silence in my hands. Daniel was beside me, Eleanor in the front row, tears already in her eyes. The crowd waited. I used to think my story was about loss, I began, but it isn't. It's about what happens when a woman finally stops trying to earn her right to exist. Applause rolled through the room like warm thunder. I looked out at the faces, strangers, survivors, daughters, sons, and I realized that none of them would ever know the woman who used to whisper apologies into her pillow. They only knew the one who stood there, spine straight, voice steady, speaking without fear. After the event, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 20. My mother read your book, she said, holding back tears. She left an abusive marriage last month because of it. She says you saved her life. I smiled softly. I didn't save her, I just reminded her she was worth saving. That night, I walked alone through the Berlin streets. The city lights shimmered off the wet pavement, and for a moment, I saw my reflection in every puddle, not the woman who had lost, but the woman who had lived. The silence I'd feared for so long now felt like music, the kind that plays after the curtain falls, when the story is done but its echo still lingers. I whispered to the night, I forgive them all, not because they deserve it, but because I deserve peace. Months later, I returned to Vienna one last time. I visited the Danube at sunrise, the place where I'd first walked after reclaiming my freedom. I sat on the same bench, pen in hand, and wrote the final words in my journal. Love is not alone. Peace is not a gift, and silence, once broken, never dies, it multiplies. I signed my name, closed the notebook, and smiled. The river moved quietly, endlessly forward, and so did I. Epilogue optional for closing narration. When The Price of Silence became a global bestseller, Daniel called to tell me that proceeds from the book were enough to fund the foundation for the next decade. I laughed and said, "Good, maybe now I can finally rest." He paused before answering, "Rest, yes, but never stop speaking." I promised him I wouldn't, because some stories don't end, they echo. Final hookey for video outro. My name is Renata Richter. I lost everything I thought I needed, and found everything I truly was. Tell me, if you were in my place, would you have forgiven them?